The U.S. has concluded its sanction review policy. This is something that the Biden administration put together, announced originally. The Treasury Department undertook it. It took like 6, 7 months for them to put this together. Spoiler alert on sanctions, not much, if anything, is changing. The big news here is that they want to target cryptocurrencies. And so let me talk a little bit about that here. The Biden administration on sanctions. Let's talk about that part first. The Treasury Department said that the widespread use of sanctions, and this is something that I have been saying even on the old show, I think episode 4, where sanctions are stupid, they don't work. You can look it up. In there, I say one of the consequences of the broad, widespread use of U.S. sanctions will eventually be that countries stop using the dollar, and then sanctions are going to be less effective. If you sanction China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, they all trade with each other off the US dollar, and the sanctions don't matter whatsoever. You sanction North Korea, well, I think those sanctions are really cruel and economic warfare, and the US shouldn't do it. However, if you're talking about just economically isolating a country, it works a hell of a lot better if you're not sanctioning the entire world. And so they kind of talk about Trump treating it like a blunt force method, and they're going to go in and do it more tactically. This almost sounds like the Obama administration, the way they came in and said that, the Bush administration's way of doing war was bad, and then they had the drone warfare and the good war in Afghanistan, all of that. And so, we could even see more widespread use of sanctions because of this. They said that they would have more rigor added to the process and that new frameworks would be developed. I think this is just wonkish mumbo jumbo that means absolutely nothing. And they say that sanctions should be tied to clear policy objectives. And what this report fails to realize and talk about is that the sanctions are tied to policy objectives. The policy objectives, the problem with it is they're not tangible, right? Calling for the overthrow of Assad is not going to happen in Syria. It's just not. And so if the objective of the Caesar Act sanctions against Syria is to overthrow Assad, guess what? Never going to happen. Sanctions aren't going to do that. And so if you want sanctions with like a very limited goal, like let's say, you want the North Koreans to be like 5% less bad to their people, and in exchange you'll lift some sanctions, well, that is something that you could probably happen. You want North Korea to maybe have not submarine launched missiles, no rail launched missiles, something like that. That's something North Korea probably trade away for sanctions, not to making any more nuclear weapons. Something North Korea might be willing to trade away, not giving up all their nukes, but not making any more, not activating their Pyongyang nuclear reactor. It made things you could get them to trade away in exchange for nuclear weapons. However, that's not what the U.S. does. They make absolutely unreasonable demands, and then even when this isn't the case, but the Treasury Department thinks it's the case, that sanctions against Iran in pre-2015 pushed them into signing the Iran nuclear deal. That's not what happens, but that's what the Biden administration and what DC pretends happened, right? And so even if that's the case and those sanctions worked, well, then they already haven't again, because like 2 years later, the Trump administration has already reimposed sanctions on Iran, demanding all kinds of other ridiculous concessions. And so, even if you do have specific objectives in mind, the administrations in the U.S. and the policy changes so frequently, and look, the dynamics change. Look, so let's say you get Iran to stop doing one thing, then the U.S. media or the war huts are going to start focusing on another thing. Oh, well, they treat their women better, so we're going to relieve some sanctions. And then, there's going to be a big post for the Washington Post or the New York Times or the FDD or some organization like that that's like, the Biden administration is about to relieve sanctions on Iran the same week that some gay person was killed or something like that, right? And they're going to say, well, you can't relieve sanctions on them because look how terrible they are. And so it's always a moving target. They say there has to be multilateral coordination. Of course, they say this and then they maintain their sanctions on Iran, which are unilateral, and in spite of our European allies who do not want those sanctions in place. And so there's really nothing by multilateral about the U.S. sanctions at this point, and yet that's what they say. Again, this is just like wonky kind of stuff that's trying to make it sound like it's going to be a more refined and better administration from the Biden team, and it's really not going to be the case. Now, I think the most important thing in here is saying that they're going to build technology to counter crypto. And even if this is only initially used to, let's say, try to prevent crypto transfers between Venezuela and Iran, that may be a thing, but they're going to eventually use it to prevent crypto transfers from you and your best friend, or you and the guy you want to buy a car from, or whatever the hell you want to spend your Bitcoin on, right? They're looking to develop technology to counter cryptocurrency, and they're doing it. They're smuggling that through this report on sanctions. And so nobody thinks it's going to be the Treasury Department, or maybe that's not people's first thought on who's going to take away cryptocurrencies. You maybe think the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, but no, it's the Treasury that's going to work on and probably develop this technology. We also have the report finding, and this is how it's just going to be the same old policy, that they say sanctions are a part of U.S. Foreign policy, and they get results, which is absolutely untrue, unless the result you want is dead children, because that's about all sanctions can produce. Now, there's a really good article on this at antiwar.com. It's Daniel Larson's most recent. I talked too much about the Matt Spoot article, and I don't have time to break it all down on today's show. But let me find it real quick here for you so I can read you the headline. The headline in this is from October 20th. Sanctions are inherently indiscriminate weapon. And he goes through and explains why sanctions are bad and why the Biden administration isn't changing. And this report is awful. And so you can check that out at antiwar.com.